The year was 1963, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina's humid air buzzed with the disciplined rhythm of military life. I was Clara Bennett, 8 months pregnant, my belly swollen under the weight of hope for a new life. My father, Colonel George Bennett, had taught me the meaning of duty before he fell in Korea a decade earlier, his name etched in the hearts of those who served with him. That legacy shaped me, a farmer's daughter turned military wife bound to Colonel James Carter, the man I loved or thought I loved, until betrayal tore it apart. It was the day of the annual parade rehearsal, a grand display of Fort Bragg's might, where General William Grant, a towering figure in the 82nd Airborne, would inspect the troops. As head of security, James was supposed to oversee every detail, and his sharp mind and sharper ambition ensured no threat slipped through. But he wasn't there. Instead, he was across town at Womack Army Hospital, hovering over his childhood friend Emily Harper, who was giving birth. I stood alone on the parade ground, the crowd's murmurs drowned out by the thudding of my heart, my hands cradling my unborn child. The crack of a sniper's bullet shattered the morning. Chaos erupted as rebel insurgents, part of a Soviet-backed plot to destabilize U.S. bases during the Cold War, unleashed their attack. General Grant, exposed on the reviewing stand, was the target. Without thinking, I threw myself in front of him, my pregnant body a shield against the lead meant for his heart. Pain seared my shoulder as a bullet grazed me, but I held my ground. The general's wide eyes meeting mine in shock and gratitude. In my past life, this moment defined my downfall. Desperate to save James from disgrace, I'd run to the hospital, my breath ragged, begging him to return. He did, rushing back to gun down the insurgents and pull General Grant to safety. The military hailed him a hero, pinning 2 new ranks on his chest. But Emily, left alone, went into premature labor and died from massive blood loss. James's grief turned to venom. He cornered me in our home as I neared my delivery, his eyes cold as steel. "You were jealous of Emily," he hissed, forcing a vial of poison to my lips. "You made me leave her, and she died. You and that bastard child will pay." The poison burned like fire, rotting my insides. I clutched my belly, begging for our baby's life, but James's hatred was unrelenting. "There are other colonels in this city," he snarled. "Why me? You wanted me to fail, didn't you?" My vision blurred as I collapsed the life of our child, a daughter I'd carried for 10 months, reduced to a pool of blood. Darkness took me, and I thought it was the end. That memory lingered sharp and raw as I stood on the parade ground in my past life, watching the chaos unfold. I'd been a fool, trusting a man who saw me as a pawn in his climb to power. But that wasn't the end of my story. If you're as gripped by this tale of betrayal and redemption as I was living, hit that like button, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and comeback. Your support keeps these tales alive, like my second chance gave me new life. My father's lessons echoed in my mind: duty above all. I'd grown up among soldiers, learning to shoot and strategize by age 10. My mother, widowed young, raised me to honor his sacrifice, and I'd married James, hoping to build a family rooted in that same honor. But James had changed since Emily returned from studying abroad, her charm pulling him away from our home. He'd skip drills to take her shopping, dismiss my worries as jealousy, and leave me alone with my swelling belly and fading dreams. The Fort Bragg of 1963 was a fortress of American resolve, its soldiers on edge as Cold War tensions simmered. The Soviet plot targeted key figures like General Grant to sow discord, and James's absence left a gaping hole in our defenses. In my past life, I'd paid for his failure with my life. This time, I vowed would be different. As the sniper's bullet whistled past, I knew I had to act not for James, but for the general, for my father's legacy, and for the child I carried. My eyes snapped open to the sharp whistle of a bullet tearing through the air, the familiar chaos of the Fort Bragg parade rehearsal unfolding around me. It was 1963 again, and I, Clara Bennett, was reborn. My mind heavy with the memories of my past life's pain. The poison's burn still lingered in my gut, a ghost of the betrayal that killed me and my unborn daughter. But this was no dream. The shouts of soldiers, the crack of gunfire, and the acrid smell of gunpowder were real. I was back on the day that changed everything, given a second chance to rewrite my fate. The parade ground was a battlefield. Rebel insurgents, Soviet-trained operatives bent on crippling America's military heart, had infiltrated the base. Their target, General William Grant, whose leadership bolstered Fort Bragg's role in the Cold War. Soldiers scrambled to form a defensive line, but the attack was precise, the insurgents slipping through gaps left by James's absence. My husband, Colonel James Carter, was at Womack Army Hospital with Emily Harper, oblivious to the crisis he was meant to prevent. I gripped my swollen belly, 8 months pregnant, and steeled myself. This time, I wouldn't run to him. Protect the general. Get him out now, I shouted, my voice cutting through the panic. My father, Colonel George Bennett, had died in Korea, shielding his men, and his courage pulsed in my veins. I'd grown up on this base, learning to navigate its rhythms from the cadence of drills to the weight of a pistol. I scanned the chaos, spotting General Grant pinned behind the reviewing stand, his leg bleeding from a stray shot. The security detail was overwhelmed, their radios crackling with desperate calls for reinforcements that wouldn't arrive in time. I moved before I could think, weaving through a hail of bullets, my heart pounding for the child I carried. The insurgents were relentless, and their Soviet training was evident in their coordinated strikes. Fort Bragg, a symbol of American strength, was their stage to sow fear, part of a broader plot to weaken U.S. defenses. I reached the general, dropping to my knees beside him. "Stay down, sir," I urged, tearing the sleeve from my dress to bind his wound. Blood soaked the fabric, but I tied it tight, my hands steady despite the gunfire. A bullet grazed my shoulder, the pain sharp but distant. I ignored it, focusing on the general's safety. In my past life, I'd run to James, begging him to return and save the day. His heroics earned him glory, but at the cost of Emily's life and mine. This time, I'd make a different choice. I grabbed a fallen soldier's pistol, checking its clip with practiced ease. My father's lessons hadn't faded. "Go to the 82nd Airborne's base," I yelled to a young guard, his face pale with fear. "Find Colonel John Lewis, deputy commander. Tell him Clara Bennett sent you. I'll hold them here." The guard hesitated, his eyes flickering to my pregnant belly. "Who are you?" he stammered. I gripped his shoulder, my voice fierce. "I'm Colonel George Bennett's daughter. Go now." Clutching his leg, General Grant nodded sharply, and the guard sprinted off. I turned back to the fight, firing at the insurgents with precision honed from years of target practice. John Lewis, James's deputy, was a man I barely knew but trusted. He'd served under my father, sharing his code of honor. Unlike James, John wouldn't abandon his post for personal gain. The insurgents pressed closer, their shouts in accented English, betraying their foreign training. I crouched beside General Grant, shielding him as bullets chipped the stand's wood. My shoulder throbbed, but my resolve held. This was my chance to right the wrongs of my past life, to protect the general and expose James's betrayal. The Cold War's shadow loomed over Fort Bragg, and I was no longer just a colonel's wife. I was a soldier's daughter, fighting for justice. The parade ground at Fort Bragg was a storm of chaos, the air thick with gunpowder and the screams of soldiers caught off guard. It was 1963, and I, Clara Bennett, stood reborn in the heart of a Soviet-backed insurgent attack, my 8-month pregnant belly no shield against the danger. My father, Colonel George Bennett, had died in Korea, his sacrifice for his men etched into my soul. Raised on this base, I'd learned to fire a rifle by 12, taught by my father's comrades who honored his memory. That training surged through me now, guiding my hands as I crouched beside General William Grant, his leg oozing blood from a sniper's bullet. The insurgents, trained operatives sent to destabilize America's military stronghold during the Cold War, moved with lethal precision. Their goal was clear: kill General Grant, a linchpin of Fort Bragg's defense strategy, and sow fear across U.S. bases. My husband, Colonel James Carter, should have been here orchestrating security. Instead, he was at Womack Army Hospital with Emily Harper, his childhood friend, abandoning his post for her childbirth. I'd run to him in my past life, desperate to save his career, only to be poisoned for it. This time, I'd rewrite the story. "Stay low, sir," I shouted to General Grant, tearing the sleeve from my cotton dress with a rip that echoed my resolve. I wrapped it tightly around his wounded leg, the blood soaking through, instantly staining my hands red. A bullet whizzed past, grazing my shoulder, the sting sharp but secondary to my mission. I scanned the chaos, soldiers scrambling, radios crackling with futile calls for backup. The insurgents had cut communication lines, a tactic straight from Soviet playbooks, leaving the security detail outnumbered. I grabbed a fallen soldier's M1911 pistol, its weight familiar from my teenage years practicing with my father's old unit. Checking the clip, I fired at an insurgent creeping closer, my aim steady despite the ache in my shoulder. "We need reinforcements," I yelled to a young guard, his face pale under his helmet. "Go to the 82nd Airborne's base, find Colonel John Lewis, deputy commander of the 2nd Regiment. Tell him Clara Bennett sent you. I'll protect the general." The guard hesitated, eyes darting to my swollen belly, disbelief etched on his face. "Ma'am, you're—" he started, but I cut him off, gripping his arm. "I'm Colonel George Bennett's daughter. My father died saving men like you." "Now move," General Grant, grimacing through his pain, nodded sharply. "Do as she says," he rasped, his voice carrying the weight of command. The guard bolted, dodging gunfire as he sprinted toward the base 3 miles away. John Lewis was a name I knew from my father's stories, a loyal officer who'd served under him, sharing his code of honor. Unlike James, whose ambition outstripped his duty, John was a soldier, respected by the men. At a regimental dinner, I'd met him only once, his quiet strength contrasting with James's flashy charm. Trusting him now was a gamble, but I had to take it. James's absence had left a hole in the defenses, and I wouldn't let his betrayal cost more lives. I returned to the fight, positioning myself between General Grant and the insurgents. Their shouts, laced with foreign accents, betrayed their Soviet training. Fort Bragg, a symbol of American resilience, was their target to weaken U.S. morale in the Cold War's shadow. I fired again, dropping another attacker, my heart pounding for the child I carried. "Hold on, sir," I told the general, his eyes meeting mine with astonishment and trust. "We need to hold out for 20 minutes. The insurgents regrouped, their rifles glinting in the morning sun. I reloaded, my hands shaking, but precise, my father's voice in my mind. "Duty doesn't falter, Clara. This wasn't just about saving the general, it was about reclaiming my life, proving I was more than James's discarded wife." The pain in my shoulder grew, but I pushed it aside, firing into the fray, determined to give John Lewis the time he needed to arrive. The Fort Bragg parade ground was a battlefield, the air choked with smoke and the staccato of gunfire. Clara Bennett, knelt beside General William Grant, my makeshift bandage soaked with his blood. My own shoulder burned from a bullet's graze, but I fired back at the Soviet-backed insurgents, their black-clad figures weaving through the chaos. My 8-month pregnant belly felt heavier, with every shot a reminder of the life I fought to protect, not just the general's, but my child's. My father, Colonel George Bennett, had taught me to face fear head-on, and his lessons held me steady now. The insurgents, trained to disrupt America's military nerve center in 1963, targeted my belly, their eyes cold with intent. They knew a pregnant woman was a vulnerable mark, a way to break our resolve. I gritted my teeth, firing the M1911 until the clip ran dry. Scrambling for another magazine from a fallen soldier, I reloaded, my hands slick with sweat and blood. "Stay with me, sir," I urged General Grant, his face pale but determined. He nodded, clutching the stand for support, his trust in me a silent anchor. A sharp pain ripped through my abdomen, sudden and soul-tearing. A bullet had struck me, piercing my belly. Blood poured from the wound, warm and relentless, soaking my dress. I gasped, clutching my stomach, feeling my baby's movements falter, then still. The pain was worse than the poison James had forced down my throat in my past life, a crushing weight that stole my breath. Tears burned my eyes, but I bit my lip until it bled, refusing to collapse. The insurgents closed in, their rifles raised, intent on finishing us. I leaned on General Grant, using his shoulder to steady my aim. "Not yet," I whispered, firing at an attacker who'd gotten too close. My vision blurred, the world tilting, but I thought of my father, who'd died shielding his men in Korea. I wouldn't let his daughter fail. The general's hand gripped mine, his voice hoarse. "Comrade, you're incredible. Hold on." His words kept me grounded, even as my body screamed to give in. The insurgents' shouts grew louder, their numbers thinning, but their resolve unbroken. I fired until my pistol clicked empty again, my strength ebbing with every heartbeat. Blood pooled beneath me, and I knew my child was slipping away. A sob tore from my throat, raw and unstoppable, but I forced myself to focus. Just a little longer, I told myself, praying John Lewis was close. The 82nd Airborne's base was 3 miles away, 20 minutes at a dead run. I had to buy that time. Gunfire roared in the distance, a new rhythm cutting through the chaos. Hoarse shouts of airborne signaled reinforcements. Colonel John Lewis burst onto the scene, his men fanning out their M16s, cutting down the remaining insurgents. John's eyes found me wide with horror as he saw the blood soaking my dress. "Clara," he shouted, sprinting to my side. I collapsed against General Grant, my body giving out as the pain overwhelmed me. "Stay with me, comrade!" The general bellowed, his voice cracking with urgency. "You saved my life, don't you dare go!" John dropped to his knees beside me, his face etched with the same resolve I'd seen in my father's old unit. "Medic." He yelled, his hands pressing against my wound, trying to stem the blood. I wanted to tell him about James, about the betrayal that led to this, but my voice was gone, drowned in the haze of pain. The insurgents were retreating, their plan foiled, but the cost was written in the blood pooling around me. My baby, the life I'd fought for, was gone again. As medics rushed to my side, General Grant gripped my hand, his eyes fierce with gratitude and grief. "You're a hero, Clara," he said. I owe you everything. I tried to speak to tell him about James's absence, but darkness closed in my body, surrendering to the loss. John's voice cut through, steady and desperate. Hold on, Clara, for your father, for you. The world faded, but my resolve didn't. This wasn't the end. I'd survived death once, and I'd fight to live again. The sterile smell of antiseptic pulled me back to consciousness, my body heavy with pain and loss. I was in a hospital bed at Womack Army Hospital, Fort Bragg. The beeping of monitors, a faint rhythm against the ache in my abdomen. It was 1963, and I, Clara Bennett, had just lost my unborn child to a Soviet insurgent's bullet while saving General William Grant. My shoulder throbbed from a graze, but the deeper wound was in my heart. My baby, carried for 8 months, was gone. My father, Colonel George Bennett, had died in Korea for duty, and I'd followed his path, shielding the general at the cost of my own future. General Grant sat beside me, his uniform replaced with civilian clothes, his face etched with fury and gratitude. His leg, bandaged from the sniper's shot, rested stiffly, but his presence was a steady anchor. "You saved my life, Clara," he said, his voice low but firm. "I sent for your husband, but—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. A young guard, still shaken from the parade ground attack, stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "Colonel Carter's is the hospital, sir, but he won't come. He said Clara's jealousy has its limits. I'm with Emily, she's giving birth." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. My husband, Colonel James Carter, head of security for the rehearsal, had abandoned his post to be with Emily Harper, his childhood friend. James had drifted away from me since her return from studying abroad a year ago. He'd skip drills to escort her to prenatal checkups, attend theater shows, or buy her gifts, dismissing my pleas to focus on his career as petty envy. I'd grown up on Fort Bragg, daughter of a fallen hero, surrounded by soldiers who taught me resilience. But James's neglect had worn me down, leaving me to face pregnancy alone, my dreams of a family crumbling. General Grant's eyes blazed with outrage. "He's in the same hospital and his wife's on death's door," he roared, slamming his fist on the bedrail. "What kind of man abandons his wife after she takes a bullet for me?" The guard shrank back, mumbling. "I told him, sir, but he warned me not to play along with Clara's sympathy act." The general's face darkened, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "He'll answer for this. I swear it." I lay still, my body weak but my mind clear. In my past life, I'd run to James during the attack, begging him to return. His heroics earned him 2 promotions, but he blamed me for Emily's death from premature labor, poisoning me and our child in revenge. This time, I'd chosen differently, sending for Colonel John Lewis instead. John, a deputy commander under James, had served with my father and shared his honor. His arrival with the 82nd Airborne had saved us, but the cost was my child. The pain was a raw wound, but I refused to let James's betrayal break me again. The hospital room felt like a battleground, the Cold War's shadow lingering. The Soviet insurgents had targeted General Grant to weaken Fort Bragg, a key U.S. base, in 1963. James's absence had enabled their attack, and his refusal to see me now confirmed what I'd long feared: his loyalty lay with Emily, not me. I'd married him hoping to honor my father's legacy, but James's ambition had twisted our love into a lie. As the general gripped my hand, promising justice, I felt a spark of resolve. This was my second chance, and I'd fight for it. The door creaked, and a nurse entered, her face tight with concern. "Mrs. Carter, you need rest," she said, adjusting my IV. General Grant stood, his expression softening. "Clara, you're a hero. Focus on healing. I'll handle the rest." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The insurgents were gone, but the war within my heart raged on. James's indifference was a fresh wound, but I was Colonel George Bennett's daughter. I'd survived death once, and I'd survive this too. The hospital room at Womack Army Hospital was quiet, save for the steady beep of monitors tracking my fragile pulse. I, Clara Bennett, lay battered but alive, my body scarred from the bullet that stole my unborn child while saving General William Grant. It was 1963, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the Cold War's tension hung heavy, the Soviet insurgent attack a stark reminder of the stakes. My shoulder ached, my abdomen a hollow ache, but my spirit clung to the lessons of my father, Colonel George Bennett, who died in Korea for his men. I was his daughter, and I wouldn't break. The door slammed open, and Margaret Carter, my mother-in-law, stormed in, her face twisted with contempt. "Still alive, Clara," she sneered, her voice dripping venom. James is with Emily, her baby's his. You, a farmer's daughter with no education, were never worthy of my colonel's son. Sign these." She thrust divorce papers at me, the pages trembling in her manicured hands. "Emily's a college graduate, refined. Her son will carry the Carter name. You're nothing but a burden." I stared at her, my grief hardening into resolve. Margaret had always despised me, seeing my rural roots as insulting her family's military prestige. In my past life, she'd spiked my food with abortion pills, suspecting I carried a girl, causing a hemorrhage that cost my first child. When I confronted her, she'd mocked me. "You couldn't give me a grandson." James, siding with her, had slapped me, dismissing our loss. This time I wouldn't beg for their approval. General Grant, in civilian clothes due to his bloodied uniform, rose from his chair, his face thunderous. "Enough," he barked, stepping between us. Margaret's eyes narrowed, mistaking him for a civilian. "Who's this?" she spat. "Another lover." "Clara, shameless tramp, losing your baby from all your fooling around." Before I could respond, she slapped the general across the face, her ring cutting his cheek. "My son's a regimental commander. I'll crush you both." The general's eyes turned to ice, his voice low and lethal. "You've just assaulted a general officer, madam. Clara's my goddaughter now." He turned to the guard at the door. "Take my seal. Notify Colonel James Carter he's relieved of command. Colonel John Lewis assumes control of the 2nd Regiment." Margaret froze, her smugness faltering as the guard dragged her out, her protests muffled. "You can't do this," she shrieked, but the door slammed shut. I exhaled the weight of Margaret's cruelty, mingling with my loss. General Grant sat beside me, his expression softening. "Clara, you're family now. No one will hurt you again." His words stirred memories of my father's comrades who'd raised me on Fort Bragg after his death, teaching me to shoot to stand tall. Margaret's attack reminded me of the life I'd endured with the Carters, James's neglect, her malice. In my past life, James had poisoned me for Emily's death, blaming my jealousy. Now his mother's venom only strengthened my resolve to break free. The Cold War context of Fort Bragg made Margaret's actions even uglier. The Soviet insurgents had exploited James's absence, nearly killing the general. Margaret's obsession with a male heir ignored the larger battle for national security. I thought of John Lewis, who'd arrived with reinforcements, his loyalty to my father's memory evident in his swift action. Unlike James, he was a man of duty whose ambition closed his eyes to the lives he endangered. The nurse returned, checking my chart with a frown. "You're stabilizing, Mrs. Carter, but you need rest." General Grant patted my hand. "Focus on healing Clara. I'll deal with James and his mother. You've done enough." I nodded, my body weak but my mind racing. The divorce papers lay on the bed, a symbol of my freedom. I was no longer just James's wife. I was Clara Bennett, daughter of a hero, and I'd fight for my new life no matter the cost. The hospital room at Womack Army Hospital was a cocoon of sterile quiet, broken only by the faint hum of monitors tracking my fading pulse. I, Clara Bennett, lay broken, my body scarred from the bullet that stole my unborn child while saving General William Grant during the Fort Bragg parade rehearsal attack in 1963. The Cold War's shadow loomed over the base, the Soviet insurgents' failed attempt to kill the general, a stark reminder of the stakes. My shoulder ached from a graze, my abdomen a hollow wound, but my spirit clung to the legacy of my father, Colonel George Bennett, who died in Korea shielding his men. His courage was my anchor now. As the echo of Margaret Carter's venomous words calling me a tramp, demanding I divorce her son. James faded with her removal from the room, I was left with General Grant's promise to protect me as his goddaughter. The divorce papers she'd thrust at me lay crumpled on the bed, a symbol of my resolve to break free. But the weight of my past life pressed down memories of betrayal sharper than the pain in my body. Margaret's cruelty wasn't new. In my past life, she'd despised me from when James brought me home, a farmer's daughter with no college degree, unworthy of her ambitious son, Colonel James Carter. When I was pregnant with our first child 2 years ago, Margaret suspected it was a girl, unacceptable to her vision of a Carter male heir. She'd slipped abortion pills into my tea, her face smug as I doubled over in pain, blood pooling between my thighs. I'd crawled to Womack Army Hospital, my knees scraped raw, begging for help, but the doctors couldn't save my baby. Devastated, I confronted her, my voice trembling. "Why, Margaret, why hurt my child?" She'd sneered. "You couldn't give me a grandson, you're useless." James, arriving with Emily Harper, his childhood friend, didn't listen to my pleas. He slapped me, his eyes cold. "How dare you bully my mother?" He'd roared, believing her lies. Ever the manipulator, Emily had stepped in, her voice sweet but venomous. "Clara, you can have another baby, can't you? Stop playing the victim. Margaret wants a grandson for James's legacy. Her words cut deeper than the slap dismissing my loss as trivial. James, siding with them, waved me off. The baby's gone. Stop making a fuss. Learn from Emily, she's gracious, not petty like you. I'd stood there, tears streaming, my heart breaking for our lost child, a symbol of the love we'd once shared. I couldn't understand how James, who'd once promised me forever, had become so unrecognizable since Emily's return from studying abroad. Those memories flooded back now, fueling my resolve. In my past life, James had poisoned me, blaming me for Emily's death after she died in premature labor. He'd forced a vial of poison down my throat, snarling, "You were jealous of Emily. You made me leave her and she died." My unborn daughter had died with me, a pool of blood on the floor. This time, Reborn, I'd chosen to save General Grant and send for Colonel John Lewis, James's deputy, who'd arrived with the 82nd Airborne to stop the insurgents. John, who'd served under my father, shared his honor, starkly contrasting James's ambition-driven neglect. General Grant's voice pulled me back. "Clara, you're safe now," he said, his hand gentle on mine. "Margaret's gone, and James will answer for his actions." His eyes held the same resolve I'd seen in my father's old comrades who'd raised me on Fort Bragg after his death, teaching me to shoot and stand tall. The Cold War had made Fort Bragg a target, and James's absence had nearly cost the general's life. Margaret's obsession with a male heir was a petty distraction from the larger battle against Soviet espionage. I nodded, my throat tight. "Thank you, sir. I want justice." The nurse entered, her face stern. "Mrs. Carter, your vitals are stabilizing, but you need rest." General Grant stood, his expression fierce. "Rest, Clara. I'll ensure James faces consequences. You've done more than enough." I closed my eyes, and the divorce papers promised freedom. My father's legacy, not James's, would guide me now. I was no longer just a colonel's wife. I was Clara Bennett, and I'd fight for my new life. The hospital room at Womack Army Hospital was a fragile sanctuary, its sterile calm shattered by the storm brewing within me. Clara Bennett, lay recovering from the bullet that took my unborn child while saving General William Grant during the Fort Bragg attack in 1963. The Cold War's tension pulsed through the base, the Soviet insurgents' attempt to kill the general, a chilling reminder of our vulnerability. My shoulder throbbed, my heart heavier with loss, but my father's legacy, Colonel George Bennett, who died in Korea, kept me grounded. I was his daughter, reborn to right the wrongs of my past life. General Grant had just left, promising justice for my husband, Colonel James Carter, whose absence had enabled the attack. Margaret, his mother, had been dragged out after her vicious tirade, leaving divorce papers that I'd signed a declaration of my freedom. But the door slammed again, and James stormed in, his uniform disheveled, his eyes blazing with rage. "You traitor!" he roared, his voice echoing off the walls. "You and John Lewis went behind me, bad-mouthing me to the general. You got me fired." His words were a slap, but his hand followed, striking my cheek with a force that snapped my head to the side. Pain flared, my vision swimming, but I met his gaze, my voice steady. "I'm done, James." I pulled the signed divorce papers from the bed, holding them up. "You abandoned your post for Emily. I took a bullet for the general because you weren't there. Our baby's gone because of you." My words were calm, but my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. John Lewis, who'd stayed to guard me at the general's request, stepped forward, his face dark with fury. "Watch yourself, James," he growled, grabbing James's wrist as he raised his hand again. John, a deputy commander who'd served under my father, was a man of quiet strength, his loyalty to duty a mirror of Colonel Bennett's. I'd chosen him to lead the reinforcements, knowing he'd honor my father's code, unlike James, whose ambition had closed his eyes to everything but Emily Harper. James yanked his arm free, his eyes wild. "You two are cheaters," he spat. "You stole my command, my career. I treated you both like family, my wife, my brother in arms, and you betray me like this." His accusations were unhinged, a desperate attempt to shift blame. I wiped the blood from my lip, my voice cold. "Betrayal. You left the general to die, James. You chose Emily over your duty, over me, over our child. I was shot saving Fort Bragg from your failure." The room crackled with tension, the Cold War's stakes underscoring every word. Fort Bragg was a fortress against Soviet plots, and James's absence had nearly cost us everything. In my past life, he'd poisoned me, blaming me for Emily's death after she died in labor. Now he stood here accusing me of an affair to deflect his guilt. John's fists clenched, his voice low. "You're a disgrace, James. Everyone in the 82nd knows you skipped drills for Emily. Clara saved the general while you played house." James's face reddened, his voice rising. You think you can ruin me? I'll make you both pay. He lunged, but John caught him, pinning his arms. Enough, John snapped. You've lost everything because of your own choices. I held the divorce papers tighter, my resolve unshaken. I'd endured James's neglect for years, clinging to memories of our early love, hoping he'd return to the man who'd once promised me a future. But that man was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd abandoned me for Emily's charm. The nurse burst in, alarmed by the commotion. Mrs. Carter, you need to calm down, she urged, checking my monitors. John released James, standing protectively by my side. He's leaving, John said, his voice final. James glared, his chest heaving, but the weight of my words and the divorce papers seemed to hit him. For a moment, his eyes flickered with something like regret, but I didn't care. I'd lost too much to believe in him again. The Cold War raged outside, but my war was here, and I'd fight it as Colonel Bennett's daughter. The hospital room at Womack Army Hospital was a battleground of raw emotions, the sterile air thick with the weight of betrayal. Clara Bennett lay in my bed, my cheeks stinging from the slap delivered by my husband, Colonel James Carter, moments ago. It was 1963, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina was reeling from a Soviet-backed insurgent attack that had nearly killed General William Grant. I'd taken a bullet to save him, losing my unborn child in the process, while James abandoned his post for Emily Harper, his childhood friend. The divorce papers I'd signed, thrust upon me by his venomous mother, Margaret, lay clutched in my hand, a symbol of my resolve to break free. James stood before me, his eyes wild with rage, accusing me and Colonel John Lewis, his deputy, of an affair that cost him his command. John, a loyal officer who'd served under my father, Colonel George Bennett, in Korea, held James back, his face taut with restrained fury. The Cold War's shadow hung over Fort Bragg, the insurgent attack, a stark reminder of the base's role as a bulwark against Soviet plots. My father's legacy duty above all kept me steady, even as my heart ached for the child I'd lost. The door creaked open, and Emily Harper staggered in her face, pale from recent childbirth, her once rosy cheeks drained of color. She leaned heavily on the frame, her eyes brimming with tears, her voice trembling. James, I heard you donated blood for me, she whispered, clutching her hospital gown. I was so worried I had to come. But Clara, she's divorcing you because of me. It's my fault. I'll take my baby and leave. Her tears fell like a practiced performance, each drop calculated to stir pity. James's rage softened as he rushed to her side, catching her as she swayed. He soothed Emily. Please don't be ridiculous, wiping her tears. You're like a sister to me. Clara's divorcing me because she's hooked up with John. A shameless woman like her could never compare to you. His words were a knife twisting in my chest, but I refused to flinch. John's fists clenched, his voice a low growl. You're delusional, James. Everyone in the 82nd knows you've been skipping duty for Emily. Clara saved the general while you played hero for her. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound that cut through the room. I said, spare me the act. Both of you, my voice steady despite the pain. Margaret already spilled your secret, James. Emily's baby is yours. The whole base knows you've been parading her around while I carried your child. Emily's eyes widened, a flash of panic betraying her facade, but she quickly recovered, her voice soft and pleading. Clara, how could you say that my baby is my late husband's? I'd never betray you like that. You're misunderstanding everything. Her words were a masterclass in deception, but I saw through her. In my past life, Emily had played the same game, charming James while dismissing my pain. When I'd lost my first child to Margaret's sabotage, Emily had smirked, telling me to have another, as if my loss was nothing. Now reborn, I recognized her manipulation for what it was, a ploy to keep James in her grasp. Really, Emily, I said, my tone icy. Then whose baby is it? You and James have been inseparable since you came back. Please don't insult me by pretending otherwise. James's face flushed, his guilt flickering before he doubled down. You're disgusting, Clara, he spat. You think you can accuse us because you're carrying my child. I was going to stay for the baby, but you're ungrateful. Apologize to Emily and her child, or take that bastard and get out. His words ignited a fire in me. I stood, ignoring the pain in my abdomen, and pointed at him, my voice shaking with fury. Don't you dare mention my child. I carried her for 8 months, and she's gone because you chose Emily over your duty. I took a bullet for the general while you were with her. You've got no shame. John stepped forward, his presence a shield. She's right, James. You left Fort Bragg vulnerable. The Soviets almost won because of you. The room pulsed with tension, the Cold War's stakes amplifying our personal war. I'd grown up on this base, trained by my father's comrades to stand tall. James's betrayal was a wound, but I was done begging for his love. The divorce papers in my hand were my freedom, and I'd fight for it no matter what lies. Emily spun. The hospital room at Womack Army Hospital crackled with raw fury, the air heavy with accusations and betrayal. I, Clara Bennett, stood clutching signed divorce papers, my cheek still burning from James Carter's slap. It was 1963, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina was a fortress under siege not just by Soviet-backed insurgents who'd attacked General William Grant, but by the lies tearing my life apart. I'd lost my unborn child saving the general while James, my husband, abandoned his post for Emily Harper. My father's legacy, Colonel George Bennett, who died in Korea, fueled my resolve to end this charade. James lunged at me again, his eyes wild, screaming, "You and John ruined my career." Before he could strike, he drew an M1911 pistol, pressing it to my forehead. "You made me a joke, Clara. I'll send you both to hell." My heart pounded, but I stood firm, staring into his maddened eyes. John Lewis, the deputy commander who'd saved us with the 82nd Airborne, reacted instantly, drawing his own weapon. "Drop it, James," he shouted, his voice steady but lethal. The door burst open, and General Grant entered his presence, a storm of authority. A guard beside him fired the shot clean, hitting James's arm. The pistol clattered to the floor, seized by John. James crumpled, clutching his wound, his arrogance shattered. General Grant's eyes were colder than I'd ever seen, his voice cutting like a blade. "Colonel James Carter, you abandoned your post during a critical operation to attend your mistress's childbirth. If Clara hadn't taken a bullet for me, I'd be dead killed by Soviet insurgents. She's my goddaughter now, and you've slandered her with vile lies." James trembled, his lips moving, but no words forming. General Grant tossed a stack of documents at him. "You claim Emily's child isn't yours. Her husband retired 3 years ago and died 2 months later. Explain how she gave birth today." James's face paled as the general continued. "You falsified records to cover your affair and disciplinary violations. But that's not all. We captured 3 insurgents alive. They confessed to receiving security plans from a female spy via Morse code. We found a telegraph machine under Emily's floorboards. Emily, who'd been silent, her pale face a mask of fragility, gasped. The room turned to her, and I saw the truth in her panicked eyes. General Grant's voice was relentless. "Emily Harper is Anna Volkov, a Soviet spy who impersonated the honest Emily, who died 3 years ago by suicide after her husband's passing. She infiltrated Fort Bragg using you, James, to leak classified information." He tossed a cremation certificate at James's feet. "The honest Emily's been gone for years. You fell for a spy's lies, betraying your wife and country." I was stunned, the pieces falling into place. In my past life, James had killed all the insurgents, leaving no survivors to interrogate, and burned Emily's belongings after she died in labor. He'd called it closure, but now I saw it was a cover-up. "You knew," I said, my voice steady. "You sent me to the parade ground hoping I'd die in the attack. Emily induced labor to lure you away, didn't she?" General Grant nodded. "Her hospital report confirms it. She took medication to trigger early labor, planning the assassination." Emily Anna dropped her facade, her eyes venomous. "If you want me dead, do it." She spat, pulling a hidden pistol from her gown, aiming at the general's back. I lunged, shoving him aside as 2 gunshots rang out. Pain didn't come. I opened my eyes to see Anna Volkov on the floor, blood pooling from a chest wound, John's weapon still smoking. He'd fired first, saving us. "Clara, you okay?" he asked, his concern genuine. I nodded, trembling but resolute. James crawled to Anna, sobbing. "Emily, no." Why, she glared at him, her last breath a hiss, then went still. General Grant's voice was cold. "You mourn a spy, James. Anna Volkov was trained in Japan, taking Emily's identity to manipulate you. You threw away a loyal wife and child for an enemy." James mumbled denials, his world collapsing. The Cold War stakes had never been clearer. Fort Bragg was a target, and James's betrayal had nearly cost us everything. As a guard cuffed him, I felt my father's strength in me, ready to face what came next. The hospital room at Womack Army Hospital was heavy with the aftermath of betrayal, the sterile air thick with the weight of truth revealed. Clara Bennett, stood clutching the signed divorce papers, my cheeks still stinging from James Carter's slap, my heart scarred from the loss of my unborn child. It was 1963, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina, stood as a bastion against Cold War threats, its defenses nearly breached by Soviet insurgents targeting General William Grant. I'd taken a bullet to save him, while my husband, Colonel James Carter, abandoned his post for Emily Harper, revealed as Anna Volkov, a Soviet spy. James knelt on the floor, cuffed his arm, bleeding from a guard's shot after he'd threatened me with a pistol. General Grant loomed over him, his eyes cold as steel, his voice ablade. James Carter, you're guilty of misconduct, treason, and colluding with the enemy. You abandoned your duty, falsified records to hide your affair, and enabled a spy to infiltrate Fort Bragg. Clara saved my life, and you slandered her, beat her, and betrayed your country. He gestured to the guard. Take him to the military tribunal for severe punishment. James's face crumpled, his once proud demeanor shattered. General, please, he stammered. Emily, Anna, and I were childhood friends. Her husband saved my life in Korea. I was helping her out of gratitude. My mother's confused old, she didn't mean what she said. His excuses were desperate, a final grasp at salvation. General Grant's expression didn't waver. You're blind, Carter. Anna Volkov was a Soviet agent trained in Japan to impersonate the honest Emily who had died 3 years ago. You fell for her lies, endangering us all. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You knew James. You sent me to the parade ground hoping I'd die in the attack. Anna induced labor to lure you away, and you covered for her, killing the insurgents in my past life to hide her tracks. James's eyes widened, guilt flickering, but he mumbled denials, shaking his head. General Grant tossed another document at him, a report detailing Anna's Morse code transmissions. Your negligence nearly cost Fort Bragg. You're done. Colonel John Lewis, who'd saved us with the 82nd Airborne, stood by my side, his presence a quiet strength. He'd served under my father, Colonel George Bennett, and shared his honor code. James, John said you disgraced the regiment, his voice low but firm. Clara's a hero, and you're a traitor. The guard Joe dragged James away, his protests fading as the door slammed shut. The room fell silent, the weight of justice settling over us. General Grant turned to me, his eyes softening. Clara, you said your father was Colonel George Bennett. I nodded, tears welling. He died in Korea, sir. Few remember him, but his comrades raised me and kept me safe. The general's face lit with recognition. George was my mentor, a brother in arms. I've searched for you since his death, hoping to repay his sacrifice. To find you here, saving my life and suffering like this. His voice broke. You're my daughter now, Clara. I'll protect you for the rest of my life. Tears spilled down my cheeks, not from pain, but from a warmth I hadn't felt since my father's death. Growing up on Fort Bragg, I'd been shaped by his comrades' stories, their lessons in courage and duty. General Grant's promise was a new family, a tether to my father's legacy. Thank you, sir, I whispered, my voice thick. He smiled, patting my shoulder. Call me William. Rest now, Clara. We've got work to do, but you've earned peace. The Cold War's stakes had crystallized in this room. Fort Bragg was a target, and James's betrayal nearly broke it. But I'd fought back, not just for the general, but for myself, for the child I'd lost, for the life I'd reclaim. As the nurse adjusted my IV, urging rest, I felt my father's strength in me. James was gone, his fate sealed, but my journey was far from over. I was Clara Bennett, daughter of a hero, and I'd face whatever came next with my head high. The weeks following the chaos at Womack Army Hospital blurred into a quiet struggle for healing both body and soul. I, Clara Bennett, had survived a bullet that took my unborn child while saving General William Grant from a Soviet insurgent attack at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in 1963. The Cold War's shadow lingered, but the base stood firm, its defenses bolstered by the truth of James Carter's treason. My former husband, now stripped of rank, faced a military tribunal that sentenced him to 50 years for misconduct and collusion with Anna Volkov, the Soviet spy who'd posed as Emily Harper. I'd moved to a quiet military compound near Fort Bragg, a sanctuary offered by General Grant, who'd named me his goddaughter. My father, Colonel George Bennett, had been his mentor in Korea, and his promise to protect me was a lifeline. The hospital had stabilized me, but the loss of my child, a daughter I'd carried for 8 months, left a wound that no bandage could cover. Therapy sessions with a base counselor helped me navigate the grief, each word a step toward reclaiming my strength. I'd grown up on Fort Bragg, raised by my father's comrades after his death, and their lessons in resilience guided me now. James's mother, Margaret Carter, had crumbled under her son's downfall. She'd come to the compound kneeling and begging me to visit James in prison to bear him another child to save the Carter line. Her desperation was pitiful, her once vicious tongue silenced by grief. You're the real daughter-in-law, Clara, she pleaded, tears streaking her face. I turned away, my voice cold. Your son killed my child, Margaret. Your family's legacy ends with him. She collapsed sobbing, and I walked away free of her shadow. Months later, I heard she'd lost her sight from endless crying, her heart giving out soon after. Anna Volkov's premature daughter, born frail from induced labor, lingered in an incubator for 3 months before passing. The news stirred no pity in me. Anna's deception had cost me everything. General Grant visited often, and his presence was a steady comfort. Clara, you're stronger than you know, he'd say, sharing stories of my father's courage. One evening over coffee in the compound's mess hall, he handed me a letter from my father written before his death. George wanted you to live fearlessly, he said. I read it, tears falling, my father's words. A beacon. Clara, duty is your heart. Never let anyone dim it. Colonel John Lewis, now commander of the 2nd Regiment, became a friend. His loyalty to my father's memory, a bond we shared. He'd check on me, his quiet strength, a reminder of the soldiers who'd raised me. You're one of us, Clara, he said, helping me find purpose. I began mentoring young recruits at the compound, teaching them marksmanship and strategy skills my father's comrades had passed to me. Each lesson was a tribute to his legacy, a way to heal by giving back to the community that shaped me. Fort Bragg in 1963 symbolized American resolve, and its soldiers were vigilant against Soviet threats. The insurgent attack had exposed vulnerabilities, but it also revealed heroes like John, like me. Therapy helped me forgive myself for the years I'd clung to James, hoping he'd love me again. I learned to honor my losses, my children, my marriage, while embracing my strength. The compound became my home. Its rhythms were familiar, and its people were my family. General Grant, now William to me, stood by me, his promise kept. One morning, as I trained recruits under the North Carolina sun, I felt a spark of hope. My father's legacy lived in me not as a burden, but as a light. I was no longer James's wife, no longer defined by betrayal. I was Clara Bennett, daughter of a hero mentor to soldiers and a woman reborn. The Cold War raged on, but I'd found my place, purpose, and peace, ready to face a new life with courage.